here's what lies behind it. It's not just the problem that Turkey was negotiating with Iran. And it's not even the fact that Turkey allowed a ship carrying a Turkish flag to confront the Israeli blockade of Gaza, which also set off another round of clucking about whether Turkey was really changing its orientation. I think there's a larger conceptual disconnect between the United States and Turkey now that's causing this friction. And that is that Turkey is essentially saying to the United States, listen, we live in this part of the world. We don't want to be left holding the bag for the chaos that often ensues after you intervene violently here. We actually are on your side, but your tactics here in the Middle East are not working. What the Turks are saying is to America, you need to ratchet down the rhetoric and ratchet down the confrontations and try to reach out to countries with conciliation and negotiation and diplomacy. You have good partners in this region. We can help you. We can advise you. But it's not in your interest to continue the policies you're following now. Well, the American response is, we are not ready for that. We are not ready to take advice from some other country about how to deal with the Middle East. We know how to deal with the Middle East. We have a policy. And, for example, our policy is no negotiations with Iran, only confront them with sanctions. And we don't want anyone going to Tehran and negotiating. Essentially, Turkey is trying to push the curve of future history, and I think Turkey represents what will be a future trend in the 21st century, and that is the rise of the middle powers. We're entering a century when South Africa and Mexico and Brazil and Turkey and Russia will be playing a much more important role in world affairs. But America's not quite ready to accept that. We're still trying to hold on to the back end of history when we ruled. So the Turks are telling us, you can't impose your will anymore, so work with us, and together we can make a lot of positive progress. The Americans are saying, no, we don't accept that. We still can't impose our will. Watch us. That's the big disconnect. Now, when it comes to Iran, we're still locked in this situation where we are essentially demanding that Iran negotiate with us and meet our conditions on the nuclear issue. Now, Iran is definitely violating its treaty obligations, and its development of a nuclear program is very disturbing, particularly since they are testing ballistic missiles at the same time. To me, this doesn't mean that we should never talk to Iran. On the contrary, the more dangerous a situation you have, the more urgent negotiation becomes. You don't need to negotiate with your friends. You already agree with them. So the fact that you have an unpleasant regime in Iran should not, in my view, be a reason not to negotiate with it. In fact, the opposite is true. Now, given the brutality with which the Iranian regime repressed those protests that erupted after last year's election, is this the right moment for the United States to begin a negotiating process with Iran? Probably not, but there's never going to be a right moment. One thing I did discover in my recent trip to Iran is what happened to the Green Movement. I asked this to a lot of people. Everybody was protesting after the election. Now we don't hear about those protests anymore. What happened? And many, many people gave me more or less the same answer, and it was, we tried that, but it didn't work. They beat us, and they threw us in jail. If we try to do it again, they'll beat us again and put us in jail again, and we don't want that. So we're not pushing anymore. The change is not going to come soon. We're still going to get the change we want, but it's not going to come anytime soon. For a country that has 25 centuries of history, I guess that's a very logical perspective to have, but it violates the American idea that problems should have quick solutions. Iranians don't necessarily think that way. Would there be then a possibility for bringing the Iranians to the negotiating table? I think there might be. I don't think it's true that we've really tried the negotiating option. We have never said to the Iranians, let's have unconditional, broad, direct negotiations. We're going to tell you everything we don't like about what you do and how we'd like you to change your behavior. But in exchange, we would also like to hear from you what you don't like about us and what in our behavior you would like us to change. And then we'll negotiate on all these issues. within that context, if there can be some kind of a global accord, then I think you might have some hope of reaching an accord that would allow us to escape from this dangerously escalating nuclear crisis. Now, if the democratic movement in Iran were to say to the U.S. and the West, isolate our leaders, don't talk to them, then I think we'd have to listen to them and we'd have to reconsider our approach. But they're not saying that. The opposition movement in Iran right now is in a very difficult position. It doesn't have any good options. The best of all the bad options would be for the United States or someone to lure the regime out of its isolation and its anger and its paranoia. And that's why I think negotiating with that regime would actually be something that the democratic movement would support and would be positive about. So in the long run, how should the U.S. think about configuring its relations in that part of the world? I think we do need partners. I think in the future we're not going to be able to approach the Middle East just on our own. We need to pick some countries that we're going to listen to and we're going to work with. I think when countries are looking for such partners, you look for countries that have two qualifications. First of all, you want countries that share your own long-term strategic goals. But that isn't enough. That's only enough for a government-to-government relationship, and those are always unhealthy if they don't involve the people. You also want to look for partners that are countries whose societies share the values of your own society. If we look around the Middle East, and we look for Muslim countries that have societies like ours that are open and democratic and relatively tolerant and understand the ideas of diversity and respect for others, Iran and Turkey are the only two that fit the bill. The Iranian society is amazingly vibrant, unfortunately repressed by a theocratic regime. Turkey is, of course, far ahead in terms of its democratic development institutionally, but not necessarily in the public eye. I really think in the future, depending on how things unfold, Iran could even vault over Turkey and become the most democratic Muslim country in the world. That could happen. So Turkey and Iran are the two countries that not only have societies like ours, but they share our long-term goals. Now, what might some of those goals be? How could it be said, for example, that the U.S. and Iran have similar long-term strategic goals? Well, I think they do, and this transcends regime. First of all, Iran has a huge ability to influence Iraq. Many of those Iraqi leaders were living in Iran for many years during the Saddam dictatorship. And by overthrowing Saddam, we essentially turned over that whole country to Iran. So Iran now has a great ability to stabilize Iraq and could even be our ticket out of Iraq. Our big fear in withdrawing from Iraq is that the place will explode again in terrible violence. But Iran can help prevent that from happening. Iran has a great ability to calm Afghanistan. A lot of Afghanistan used to be part of Iran. Iran is very deeply connected there. Iran wants a clear, safe flow of energy from the Middle East to the West, which is what we also want. Iran is the bitter enemy of radical Sunni movements like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So over the long run, we do have important strategic commonalities with Iran. In addition, the Turkey idea, which is we're your ally, we're in NATO, we're pro-Western, we're pro-American, but we're just telling you, moderate your approach to this part of the region, is an approach we should accept. We should start changing our attitude and listening a little more. If we're going to listen a little more, the Turks would be the first ones for us to listen to in that part of the world, and they might help us crack the wall and break into Iran. So I don't share the general view that the Middle East crisis is totally hopeless. There's not great amounts of hope. Nonetheless, the chance for change is there if we only seize it. If we are willing to break away from the fetters of the past and out of the paradigms of the old age and try to think big and think new. As the great Persian poet Rumi put it, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?